You know what they say about popular girls calling you the ugly duckling? Tables can turn at a 10-year reunion, and honey, mine didn't just turn. They fucking flipped, caught fire, and launched into orbit. But let me back up, because this story starts way before the reunion. It starts with me, 17 years old, standing in the hallway of Jefferson High with my heart beating so hard I thought it might actually break a rib. The memory still makes my chest tight, even now. I'd been walking to my locker after chemistry class when I heard them. Madison, Brittany, and their little crew of perfectly highlighted disciples huddled by the water fountain like some kind of teenage coven. Their voices carried that particular pitch that meant someone was about to get verbally eviscerated. That someone was me. I couldn't make out the words at first, just the rhythm of their conversation, that sing-song cadence of girls who'd perfected the art of social murder. My stomach dropped before my brain even processed why. You know that feeling when you're walking alone at night and you hear footsteps behind you? That primal awareness that you're prey? Yeah, that's what hit me. Then Madison's voice cut through the hallway noise like a blade. Oh my god, did you see her trying to talk to Jake earlier? Like, seriously? The ugly duckling thinks she's got a shot. The world tilted. My vision went fuzzy at the edges, like someone had smeared Vaseline on a camera lens. The ugly duckling. That's what they called me. Not behind my back. That would have been merciful. No, they'd branded me with it, right there in the open for everyone to hear. Brittany's laugh was like glass breaking. I almost feel bad for her. Almost. But then I remember she actually thought she was cute in that dress at homecoming. My hands started shaking. Not just trembling, full-on earthquake shaking. The combination lock on my locker might as well have been written in hieroglyphics for all the sense it made through the blur of tears I refused to let fall. Someone should tell her that makeup tutorials on YouTube can only do so much. Another voice chimed in. I think it was Ashley, but they all blended together into this hydra of cruelty. The hallway started spinning. Not metaphorically, literally spinning, like I was drunk on humiliation. My face felt like it was on fire, that burning sensation when embarrassment meets rage and they have a cage match in your bloodstream. Every eye in the hallway felt like a spotlight. Every whisper sounded like an indictment. I managed to get my locker open somehow, my fingers working on muscle memory while my brain short-circuited. The books I grabbed might as well have been bricks for all the attention I could pay to them. All I could think about was getting out of there, getting away from their voices, their laughter, their casual assassination of whatever self-esteem I'd scraped together that morning. But here's the thing about being 17 and humiliated in front of half your class. You don't just get to leave. You have to finish the day. You have to sit through English Lit and pretend your world hasn't just imploded. You have to eat lunch at your table for one while they hold court at theirs, probably still laughing about the ugly duckling who thought she was a swan. The rest of that day passed in a haze of shame and fury. I kept replaying their words, each repetition making them sharper, more poisonous. The ugly duckling. Like I was some kind of before picture in their perfect after stories. That night, I stared at myself in my bedroom mirror until my eyes burned. Ugly duckling. The words echoed in my head like a mantra of self-destruction. I cataloged every flaw they saw. My nose that was a little too wide, my eyebrows that never seemed to cooperate, my skin that broke out at the worst possible moments, my hair that had a mind of its own, usually a chaotic one. I cried until my face was puffy and red, which only made me feel worse because it confirmed everything they'd said. Even my crying was ugly. But somewhere between the tears and the self-loathing, something else started to grow. Something cold and hard and patient. Rage. Not the hot, explosive kind that burns out quick. This was different. This was the kind of anger that settles into your bones and makes a home there. The kind that whispers instead of screams, that plans instead of reacts. I made myself a promise that night, staring at my tear-streaked reflection. Someday, somehow, I was going to show them exactly what this ugly duckling could become. I was going to prove that their opinion of me was worth less than the lip gloss they constantly reapplied. The next few years of high school were a special kind of hell. Not because they kept calling me names. That would have been too easy. No, they did something worse. They ignored me. Completely. Like I was furniture or wallpaper or some other forgettable part of the scenery. Do you know what it's like to be invisible in a place where you're forced to exist for 8 hours a day? To have conversations stop when you approach, not because you're unwelcome, but because you're literally not worth acknowledging? It's like being a ghost in your own life. Madison would look right through me in the hallways. Brittany would act like I didn't exist when we were assigned to the same group project. They'd perfected the art of social assassination, not just killing you, but making you disappear entirely. But I was learning too. I was watching them, studying them like specimens under a microscope. I memorized their routines, their insecurities, their little cruelties. I filed away every detail, every weakness, every moment of vulnerability they thought no one else noticed. Because here's what they didn't understand about ugly ducklings. We don't stay ugly forever. We just learn to hide our time. The day I graduated, I looked at Madison and Brittany in their perfect dresses with their perfect smiles, and I smiled back. Not because I was happy to see them, but because I knew something they didn't. This wasn't the end of our story. It was just the intermission. 10 years. That's how long I had to prepare for the moment when I'd see them again. 10 years to transform from their ugly duckling into something they'd never see coming. And as I walked across that stage to get my diploma, I was already planning exactly how I was going to make them eat every single word they'd ever said about me. College was where I learned the difference between revenge and justice. Revenge is hot, messy, and usually backfires spectacularly. Justice? Justice is cold, calculated, and surgical. Justice waits for the perfect moment to strike. And I had 10 years to perfect my technique. The first 2 years after graduation, I'll admit, I was a mess. I'd wake up some mornings and the first thing I'd remember was their laughter echoing through that hallway. My roommate at State probably thought I had anger management issues because I'd randomly start muttering about showing them while stress-eating cereal at 2 a.m. The wounds were still fresh, still bleeding all over my attempts at a normal college experience. But then something clicked during my junior year. I was in my dorm room scrolling through Facebook, because yes, this was back when Facebook was still a thing, and I saw Madison's profile picture. She was at some party, surrounded by the same vapid faces from high school, still playing Queen Bee in what looked like a significantly smaller pond. The caption read something about living my best life, with approximately 17 heart emojis. My first instinct was that familiar stab of inadequacy. Look at her, still perfect, still popular, still everything I wasn't. But then I really looked at the photo. The angles were carefully chosen. The lighting was strategic. The smile was just a little too wide, too forced. And suddenly I realized something that hit me like a lightning bolt of clarity. She was trying too hard. That's when I understood the fundamental flaw in my thinking. I'd been operating under the assumption that they were living effortlessly perfect lives while I struggled to find my place in the world. But what if they weren't? What if their high school reign had been the peak, and everything after was just desperately trying to recapture that golden moment? I started paying attention differently. Not obsessively. I had a life to build after all, but strategically. I'd check their social media every few months, cataloging the patterns. Madison's posts were getting more frequent, more desperate for validation. Brittany had gotten engaged to some guy who looked like he peaked in high school too, and their relationship drama was playing out in passive-aggressive comment sections for everyone to see. Meanwhile, I was quietly becoming everything they'd never expected me to be. It started with small changes. I figured out that my unmanageable hair wasn't unmanageable at all. It just needed the right products and someone who knew how to work with curls instead of against them. I discovered that my weird fashion sense was actually pretty avant-garde when I stopped trying to copy their cookie-cutter style and started developing my own. But the real transformation wasn't external. It was internal. I was learning things they'd never bothered to learn because they'd never had to. I was developing actual skills, actual knowledge, actual depth. While they were coasting on their high school reputations, I was building something real. I majored in communications with a minor in psychology. Not because I was planning to be a therapist, but because I wanted to understand exactly how people like them operated. I wanted to know what made them tick, what their insecurities were, how they justified their cruelty to themselves. Knowledge is power, and I was collecting it like a dragon hoards gold. Graduate school was where I really hit my stride. I chose a program in digital marketing and brand management, partially because I was good at it, but mostly because I knew it would give me skills they'd never even thought to develop. While they were posting selfies and hoping for likes, I was learning how to craft narratives that could make or break reputations with the click of a button. My thesis was on social media psychology and the long-term effects of high school social hierarchies on adult behavior. I interviewed hundreds of people, studied patterns, analyzed data, and you know what I discovered? People like Madison and Brittany almost never change. They just get older and more desperate, clinging to their glory days like life preservers on a sinking ship. But here's where it gets interesting. I also discovered that people like me, the ones who got kicked down in high school, we have a superpower. We're used to being underestimated. We're used to fighting for everything we get. And we're absolutely fucking dangerous when we finally figure out our worth. By year 7 post-graduation, I was working at a boutique marketing firm in the city, specializing in crisis management and reputation rehabilitation. Ironic, right? I was literally getting paid to clean up the messes of people who'd probably been just as cruel as my high school tormentors. But I was good at it. Really good. I understood how to manipulate narratives, how to shift public perception, how to make people believe whatever story I wanted them to believe. That's when I started planning. Not the revenge. That was always going to happen. But the how. The when. The perfect, devastating how. I knew the 10-year reunion was coming. I'd been getting the Facebook invitations, the save the date posts, the increasingly desperate attempts by the planning committee to drum up attendance. Madison was on the committee, of course. She'd appointed herself to it the way she'd appointed herself to everything else in high school. Some things never change. The plan started simple. Show up looking amazing, successful, and completely unbothered by their existence. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that wasn't enough. That was just winning by default. That was letting them off easy. No, I wanted them to know. I wanted them to understand exactly what they'd unleashed when they decided to make me their verbal punching bag. I wanted them to realize that their casual cruelty had consequences, and those consequences were standing right in front of them in designer heels and a smile sharp enough to cut glass. But how do you destroy someone's self-image without becoming the villain? How do you make them face the truth about themselves without looking like you're the one with the problem? That's when I remembered something my psychology professor had said. The most devastating truths are the ones people tell themselves. I didn't need to attack them. I didn't need to embarrass them or humiliate them or make a scene. I just needed to show them exactly what they'd lost when they decided I wasn't worth their time. I needed to make them realize that their opinion of me had been spectacularly, embarrassingly wrong. The physical transformation was the easy part. I'd been working out consistently since college, not to get skinny, fuck that noise, but to get strong. I'd found a personal trainer who specialized in building confidence along with muscle, and she'd taught me how to carry myself like I owned every room I walked into. My wardrobe had evolved from trying too hard to fit in to effortlessly elegant with just a hint of edge. I'd learned the difference between expensive and valuable, between trendy and timeless. I'd developed my own style instead of copying theirs, and it turned out that when you dress for yourself instead of for other people's approval, you look about 1,000 times better. But the real work was mental. I'd spent years in therapy, not because I was broken, but because I wanted to understand myself better than they'd ever understood themselves. I'd worked through my insecurities, faced my demons, and come out the other side with a self-awareness that was both my armor and my weapon. I knew exactly who I was now. I knew what I was worth. And I knew that their opinion of me had never been about me at all. It had been about their own insecurities, their own fears, their own need to feel superior to someone. The reunion was scheduled for a Saturday night in October. I'd been watching the Facebook event page like a hawk, noting who was going, who was maybe going, who was definitely not going. Madison and Brittany were both confirmed attendees, of course. They'd been posting about it for months, sharing memories and talking about how excited they were to catch up with everyone. I waited until the week before to RSVP. Just a simple attending. With no comment, no excitement, no indication that I'd been planning this moment for the better part of a decade. Let them wonder. Let them remember that I existed, if they even remembered me at all. The night before the reunion, I stood in front of my full-length mirror and smiled. Not the fake smile I'd perfected for networking events, but a real one. Predatory maybe, but real. I looked fucking incredible. Not because I'd conformed to their standards of beauty, but because I'd transcended them entirely. I was wearing a dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent, but you couldn't tell by looking at it. It was understated, elegant, the kind of thing that whispered money. Instead of screaming it, my hair was sleek and shiny, my makeup was flawless but natural looking, and my shoes were the kind that made you walk taller just by putting them on. But the real weapon wasn't what I was wearing, it was what I was carrying. In my designer clutch, I had business cards for my new company, the marketing firm I'd started 6 months ago that was already pulling in 7 figures annually. I had photos on my phone of the penthouse apartment I'd just bought, the vacation I'd taken to Santorini, the charity gala where I'd been honored for my work with anti-bullying initiatives. I had a life that was everything they'd never expected me to achieve. I had success that was built on substance, not just surface. I had confidence that came from knowing exactly who I was and what I was capable of. And I had a plan. The plan wasn't complicated. It didn't need to be. Sometimes the most effective strategies are the simplest ones. I was going to walk into that reunion looking like $1 million, and I was going to be gracious and kind and interested in everyone's lives. I was going to ask thoughtful questions and give genuine compliments and be the kind of person everyone remembered as being lovely. And when Madison and Brittany inevitably tried to assert their old social dominance, when they inevitably made some comment about how different I looked or how surprising, it was that I'd done so well for myself. I was going to smile. I was going to thank them for the motivation. I was going to let them know that their bullying had been the best thing that ever happened to me because it had taught me exactly what kind of person I never wanted to be. And then I was going to walk away, leaving them to choke on the realization that they'd created their own nemesis. The ugly duckling was about to become a swan. But not just any swan, a swan with teeth. I checked my reflection one more time, adjusted my lipstick, and headed for the door. It was time to show them exactly what 10 years of character development could do. Game on, bitches. The Jefferson High School gymnasium had been transformed into something that was trying very hard to look elegant, but mostly just looked like a gymnasium wearing a fancy dress. Draped fabric couldn't hide the basketball hoops, and no amount of ambient lighting could mask the faint smell of decades of teenage sweat and broken dreams. But you know what? It was perfect. Absolutely fucking perfect for what I had planned. I paused at the entrance, taking in the scene like a general surveying a battlefield. The check-in table was manned by some people I vaguely recognized, former student council members who'd probably peaked when they got to put secretary on their college applications. Behind them, the gymnasium buzzed with the particular energy of people desperately trying to prove they'd made something of themselves. My heart was doing this weird thing where it felt like it was beating in slow motion, each thump deliberate and powerful, not nervous. Not anymore. This was anticipation. This was the moment I'd been building toward for 10 years, and every cell in my body knew it. The girl at the check-in table, Sarah something, former debate team captain, looked up at me with that polite but blank expression people wear when they're trying to place a face. I watched her eyes do a little dance of confusion. She knew she should recognize me, but the math wasn't adding up in her head. "Hi there! Name for the list?" Her voice had that forced cheerfulness of someone working a retail job. "Emma Harrison," I said, and watched her face go through a series of micro-expressions. Confusion, recognition, shock. A brief moment of what might have been panic. Bingo. Oh my God, Emma! You look." She paused, clearly trying to find words that wouldn't be insulting. "You look amazing. So different." I smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't quite reach your eyes but isn't trying to hide anything either. "Thank you, Sarah. You look exactly the same." It wasn't a compliment. I took my name tag, complete with my senior year photo, which looked like a hostage situation, and pinned it to my dress. Let them see the before and after. Let them really process the transformation. The gymnasium was divided into predictable social clusters. The jocks were by the DJ, still trying to relive their glory days. The theater kids had claimed a corner near the refreshment table, probably discussing whatever avant-garde production they'd seen last weekend. And there, holding court near the center of the room like they owned the place, were Madison and Brittany. They looked like people who'd been trying to recapture their 18-year-old selves for the past decade. Madison's dress was trying too hard to be young and trendy, hitting that awkward sweet spot between desperate and inappropriate for someone approaching 30. Brittany's hair was the same style she'd worn in high school, but now it looked less effortlessly perfect and more clinging to the past. But here's the thing about really studying your enemies for 10 years. You learn to see past the surface. Madison's smile was just a little too wide, her laugh just a little too loud. She was working the room, but it felt performative, like she was an actress playing the role of someone popular. Brittany kept touching her engagement ring, twisting it around her finger in what I now recognized as an anxiety tell. They hadn't seen me yet. They were too busy being the center of attention, surrounded by the same orbit of people who'd followed them around in high school. Some things never change, but some things do. I made my way to the bar. Yes, they had a bar in the gymnasium, because apparently the planning committee had decided that alcohol was the only way to make this bearable. Smart call. I ordered a gin and tonic, extra lime, and used the time to continue my reconnaissance. Emma fucking Harrison. I turned to find Mike Chen, former mathlete and current .com millionaire, if his LinkedIn profile was accurate. He was grinning at me like I'd just performed a magic trick. Mike Chen, I replied, genuinely pleased to see him. Mike had been one of the few people in high school who'd treated me like a human being instead of a social pariah. I heard you sold your company for stupid money. Stupid money is right. But look at you! You look like you should be on a magazine cover. He shook his head in amazement. Remember when we used to eat lunch together because we were both too weird for the cool kids? I remember you being too smart for them. I was just too ugly. I said it matter-of-factly, without a trace of self-pity. Mike's expression shifted, became more serious. You were never ugly, Emma. You were just surrounded by assholes who made you feel that way. And there it was. The first crack in the foundation of the narrative I'd been carrying for 10 years. Mike had seen me then, really seen me, when I couldn't see myself. The realization hit me like a physical sensation, warmth spreading through my chest. Thank you, I said, meaning it. That actually means a lot. Besides, Mike continued, his grin returning, look at you now. You're like revenge incarnate. Please tell me you're planning something diabolical. I laughed, a real laugh this time. Define diabolical. Emma? Emma Harrison? The voice behind me made every muscle in my body tense. I'd been expecting it, planning for it, but hearing it still sent a jolt through my system like touching a live wire. I turned slowly, deliberately, letting the anticipation build. Madison stood there, and I had a moment of perfect clarity. She was exactly as I remembered her, but smaller somehow. Not physically, she was still tall, still had that carefully maintained figure, but smaller in presence. The commanding aura she'd wielded in high school had faded, leaving behind someone who was trying very hard to seem important. Madison, I said, my voice perfectly neutral. How are you? Her eyes were doing that thing Sarah's had done, trying to reconcile the person in front of her with the memory she'd stored away. But where Sarah had been genuinely pleased, Madison looked unsettled. I'm good. I'm great, actually. You look... She paused, and I could see her brain working, trying to figure out how to handle this situation. You look really different. Thank you, I said, as if she'd given me a genuine compliment. You look exactly the same. Again, not a compliment. Mike was watching this exchange with barely concealed glee. He'd front row seats to what he clearly recognized as the opening act of something spectacular. So what are you up to these days? Madison asked, her voice carrying that particular pitch that meant she was fishing for information she could use to reassert her superiority. I run a marketing agency, I said simply. What about you? Oh, I'm in pharmaceutical sales. It's really challenging, you know? Very competitive industry. Pharmaceutical sales. Also known as I take doctors out to expensive lunches and hope they prescribe whatever drug I'm pushing this month. I'd done my research. I knew exactly what she did, and I knew exactly what she made doing it. That sounds interesting, I lied smoothly. Are you still in touch with everyone from high school? Oh, absolutely. Brittany and I are still super close. She's here tonight, actually. You should come say hi. The invitation was extended with the kind of fake enthusiasm that barely concealed the underlying calculation. She wanted to bring me over to their group, to re-establish the old dynamics, to remind everyone, myself included, of exactly where I'd stood in the social hierarchy. Perfect. I'd love to, I said, and meant it in a way that would have terrified her if she'd been smart enough to understand it. The walk across the gymnasium felt like a victory march. I could feel eyes on me, could sense the ripple of curiosity and recognition spreading through the room. The girl who'd been invisible was suddenly very, very visible. Brittany was in the middle of telling some story about her wedding planning when we approached. She looked up and I watched her face cycle through the same expressions as everyone else. Confusion, recognition, shock, but underneath it all something else. Something that looked almost like fear. Oh my God, she said, her voice strangled. Emma? Hi, Brittany, I said, giving her the same serene smile I'd been perfecting all evening. Congratulations on your engagement. She looked down at her ring automatically, twisting it around her finger. Thank you. Wow. You look different, I supplied helpfully. I know. I've been hearing that all night. The group around us had gone quiet, sensing the tension without fully understanding it. These were people who remembered the old dynamics, who remembered exactly how these interactions used to go. But the script had changed, and they weren't sure what their lines were supposed to be. "So," Madison said, clearly trying to regain control of the conversation, "Emma was just telling me about her marketing thing." Marketing thing? As if I'd mentioned selling candles on Facebook instead of running a 7-figure agency. "It's a marketing agency," I corrected gently. "We specialize in crisis management and reputation rehabilitation." "Oh," Brittany said, and I could practically see the gears turning in her head. That's really specific." "It is," I agreed. I got into it because I became fascinated by how people construct their identities, especially during formative years. How the stories we tell ourselves about who we are can become so fixed that we never question them, even when they're completely wrong. The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel the group processing my words, trying to figure out if I was talking about what they thought I was talking about. "That's really interesting," said Ashley Peterson, who'd been part of their inner circle but had always been more follower than leader. "Like, how do you mean?" "Well," I said, taking a sip of my gin and tonic, "take high school, for example. Everyone develops these fixed ideas about themselves and others based on such limited information. The popular girl, the smart kid, the athlete, I paused, letting the moment hang in the air. "The ugly duckling." Madison's face went pale. Brittany's hand moved to her throat, an unconscious gesture of protection. "But here's the thing about those labels," I continued, my voice still perfectly pleasant, conversational. "They're almost always wrong. They're based on such a narrow window of time, such specific circumstances. People change. People grow. People become things that would have been impossible to imagine when they were 17. "Right," Madison said quickly, clearly trying to redirect the conversation. "Like, I never would have imagined I'd be in sales. I always thought I'd be in fashion or something creative." "What did you imagine I'd be?" I asked, turning to face her directly. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Madison's eyes darted around the group, looking for escape routes, for allies, for any way to avoid answering. I don't know. I didn't really... She trailed off, realizing that any answer would be an admission of how little she'd thought of me. "You didn't think about it at all," I said, not unkindly. "Which is fair. I wasn't really on your radar back then. We all had our own things going on," Brittany said quickly, trying to smooth over the tension. "You know how high school is." "I do know how high school is," I agreed. I remember it very clearly. I remember a lot of things very clearly. The group was starting to shift uncomfortably. Some of them were beginning to remember specific incidents, specific cruelties, specific moments when they'd stood by and watched or actively participated in making my life hell. "Emma," Madison said, her voice taking on a slightly pleading tone, if there was ever anything." "Anything what?" I asked, my voice still perfectly pleasant. "If we ever made you feel bad or anything, we were just kids, you know? We were all just figuring things out." And there it was. The moment I'd been waiting for. The acknowledgement, wrapped in an excuse but still an acknowledgement. "Made me feel bad?" I repeated, as if I was genuinely confused. "Oh, you mean the ugly duckling thing?" The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the DJ switching songs across the room. Madison and Brittany both looked like they wanted to disappear into the floor. "You remember that?" Brittany whispered. "I remember everything," I said simply. "I remember standing by my locker hearing you call me that. I remember how it felt, how it made me question everything about myself, how it made me hate what I saw in the mirror." The guilt on their faces was almost palpable, but I wasn't done. "But here's what I want you to know," I continued, my voice warming with genuine gratitude. "That moment, that name, that casual cruelty, it was the best thing that ever happened to me." Confusion replaced guilt on their faces. "Because it taught me something invaluable. It taught me that other people's opinions of me were just opinions. It taught me that I had a choice. I could let your words define me, or I could define myself. And I chose to define myself. I gestured to myself, to the woman I'd become. So thank you," I said, and I meant it. "Thank you for showing me exactly what kind of person I never wanted to be. Thank you for motivating me to become someone better. Thank you for proving that the ugly duckling was never ugly at all. She was just surrounded by people who couldn't see beauty in anything that wasn't exactly like them." Madison was crying now, silent tears running down her cheeks. Brittany was staring at me like I was speaking a foreign language. "Emma," Madison said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." "I know you are," I said gently. and I forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because I deserve to be free from carrying that anger around. I finished my drink and set the glass down on a nearby table. I hope you both have wonderful lives, I said, and I meant that too. I hope you figure out who you are when you're not trying to be who you were at 17. I hope you find the kind of happiness that comes from being genuinely good people, not just popular people. I turned to leave, then paused and looked back over my shoulder. Oh, and Madison? That pharmaceutical sales thing? There's a company called Meridian Therapeutics that's looking for someone with your exact background. The pay is about 40% better than what you're making now, and they're much more ethical in their practices. You should look into it. Her eyes widened. How did you... I know people, I said with a smile. I know lots of people now. Turns out, when you're not wasting energy on being cruel to others, you have a lot more time to build genuine relationships. And with that, I walked away, leaving them to process what had just happened. I made my way around the room, chatting with old classmates, catching up with people I'd genuinely missed, building new connections with people who'd grown into interesting adults. I danced with Mike Chen, who was an excellent dancer and an even better conversationalist. I laughed with the theater kids, who'd all become exactly as successful and eccentric as I'd expected. I even talked shop with some of the former jocks who'd channeled their competitive drives into surprisingly successful business ventures. But mostly, I watched Madison and Brittany. They stayed for another hour, but they were different now. Quieter, more subdued. They kept looking at me across the room, and I could see them trying to process what had happened, trying to understand how the power dynamic had shifted so completely. When they finally left, they didn't make a big show of it. They just quietly gathered their things and slipped out, looking like they'd been to a funeral instead of a reunion. I stayed until the very end, until the DJ played the last song and the lights came up and the decorations started coming down. I helped Sarah and the other committee members clean up, because that's what good people do. They thanked me profusely, told me how great it was to see me, how proud they were of what I'd accomplished. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Madison. Thank you for what you said about Meridian. I looked them up. You're right, they're exactly what I've been looking for. I don't know why you helped me after everything, but thank you. I smiled, typing back, because everyone deserves a chance to be better than they were. Her response came immediately. You're a better person than I ever gave you credit for. I'm sorry it took me 10 years to see it. I put my phone away and got in my car. The drive home was quiet, peaceful. I wasn't thinking about revenge anymore, or justice, or proving anything to anyone. I was thinking about how good it felt to be exactly who I was, to be comfortable in my own skin, to know that I'd built something real and meaningful with my life. The ugly duckling had become a swan, but more importantly, she'd become someone who could help other ugly ducklings find their wings. And that, I thought as I pulled into my driveway, was the most beautiful transformation of all. That was 3 months ago. 3 months since I walked out of that gymnasium feeling like I'd finally closed a chapter of my life that had been hanging open for way too long. You'd think that would be the end of it, right? Revenge served, justice delivered, ugly duckling transformed into a beautiful swan who gets to fly away into the sunset with her head held high. But here's what nobody tells you about revenge. It's never quite as satisfying as you think it's going to be. Don't get me wrong, seeing Madison and Brittany finally understand what they'd done, finally face the consequences of their casual cruelty, was everything I'd imagined it would be. The look of recognition in their eyes when they realized they'd created their own nemesis, the weight of their guilt when they understood how deeply their words had cut me, the shock of discovering that their victim had become more successful than they'd ever dreamed of being, yeah, all of that felt pretty fucking incredible. But you know what felt even better? The moment I chose to help Madison instead of destroying her. She did apply for that job at Meridian Therapeutics, by the way. Got it too. Sent me a LinkedIn message 2 weeks later saying it was the best career move she'd ever made, thanking me again for the tip. The old me would have been annoyed that she was benefiting from my kindness after everything she'd put me through. But the new me, the real me, felt genuinely happy for her. That's when I knew I'd really changed. Not just on the outside, not just in terms of success or appearance or confidence, but fundamentally, I'd become someone who could extend grace to people who'd never extended it to me. I'd become someone who could help an enemy become a better person instead of just trying to hurt them back. The crazy thing is, I never intended for it to go that way. I'd spent 10 years planning their downfall, imagining their humiliation, fantasizing about the moment when I'd prove that their ugly duckling had become a swan. But when the moment came, when I was standing there looking at two women who'd peaked in high school and were desperately trying to cling to relevance, I felt something I hadn't expected. I felt sorry for them. Not sorry enough to let them off the hook. They needed to face what they'd done, needed to understand the impact of their actions. But sorry enough to realize that destroying them wouldn't actually fix anything. It wouldn't undo the pain they'd caused me. It wouldn't magically heal the 17-year-old girl who'd stood by her locker with tears in her eyes. Only I could do that. Only I could choose to stop carrying their poison around with me. The weeks following the reunion were weird. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the euphoria of victory to wear off and leave me feeling empty. But it never came. Instead, I felt light. Like I'd been carrying a backpack full of rocks for 10 years and had finally set it down. I started sleeping better. I stopped checking their social media obsessively. I even unfollowed them entirely, not out of anger but out of genuine disinterest. Their lives were no longer relevant to mine. They were just people I used to know, people who'd taught me an important lesson about resilience and self-worth, people I could think about without my chest tightening with old rage. But the real surprise came when I started getting messages from other people who'd been at the reunion. Apparently, word had spread about what happened that night, but not in the way I'd expected. Instead of gossip about drama or comeuppance, people were talking about transformation, about second chances, about the possibility of becoming someone better than who you were in high school. Sarah from the check-in table messaged me, asking if I'd be willing to speak at a local high school about overcoming bullying. 3 other former classmates reached out to share their own stories of high school trauma and adult healing. Even some of Madison and Brittany's former friends contacted me, apologizing for their own roles in the casual cruelty that had defined our teenage years. That's when I realized that my revenge had become something bigger than revenge. It had become a catalyst for other people's growth, other people's healing, other people's transformations. The ugly duckling story wasn't just about me anymore. It was about anyone who'd ever been told they weren't good enough, pretty enough, cool enough, worth enough. I started speaking at schools, sharing my story not as a tale of triumph over mean girls, but as a reminder that other people's opinions of you are just opinions. That the labels people put on you in high school don't have to define you for the rest of your life. That sometimes the most beautiful thing you can do is refuse to let someone else's cruelty make you cruel in return. The first time I told the story to a group of teenagers, I watched their faces change as they realized that the awkward, insecure, ugly girl in the story had become the confident, successful woman standing in front of them. But more importantly, I watched them realize that they could make the same transformation. Not by changing their appearance or trying to become popular, but by deciding that their worth wasn't determined by anyone else's approval. That's when I understood what the real moral of the ugly duckling story was. It was never about becoming beautiful according to someone else's standards. It was about recognizing that you were beautiful all along. You just needed time to grow into yourself, to figure out who you really were underneath all the labels and expectations and limitations other people had placed on you. Madison and I actually ended up having coffee a few weeks ago. She reached out, said she'd been thinking about what I'd said at the reunion, about becoming someone better than who she was at 17. She wanted to know how I'd done it, how I'd managed to transform not just my circumstances, but my entire sense of self. We talked for 2 hours. She cried a lot, apologized again, more specifically this time, for specific incidents and specific cruelties that I'd honestly forgotten about. She told me about her own insecurities in high school, her own fears about not being good enough, her own desperate need to feel superior to someone, anyone, to validate her own worth. It didn't excuse what she'd done, but it explained it. And understanding the why behind someone's cruelty, I discovered, is the first step toward truly forgiving them. By the end of our conversation, I realized that Madison and I weren't that different. We'd both been insecure teenagers trying to figure out who we were in a world that seemed determined to categorize and judge us. The difference was that she'd dealt with her insecurity by pushing others down, while I'd dealt with mine by building myself up. As I walked back to my car that day, I thought about 17-year-old me, standing by her locker with tears in her eyes, and I wished I could go back and tell her what I knew now, that those girls calling her ugly weren't seeing her clearly. That their opinion of her was a reflection of their own limitations, not hers. That she was already beautiful, already valuable, already worthy of love and respect and kindness. But maybe that's the point. Maybe we all need to go through our own ugly duckling phase, need to feel the sting of rejection and the burn of being underestimated, so we can appreciate the beauty of becoming exactly who we're meant to be. The popular girls called me Ugly Duckling because they couldn't see what I would become. But the truth is, I was never an ugly duckling at all. I was just a swan who hadn't learned to fly yet. And now I'm soaring. Tables turned indeed.